They rose from nothing and changed everything.
The ancient Greeks changed the world in about 1,000 years flat.
This was a time and a place when there was a collision of ideas and inspiration that resulted in a truly extraordinary culture.
But of all the many great civilizations in the ancient world, what made this one so special?
People talk about the greatness of Greece. Why them? Why there? And that's the question.
And why are we, millennia later, so intimately linked to the radical revolution that took place here?
Ancient Greece and our modern society are connected. We cannot possibly understand our society if we do not understand how it was born and how it developed.
It's a story for the ages and for today, of attaining greatness and losing it.
How long did ancient Greece last? Was it forever? No. It was fleeting.
It was the beginning of a beautiful new era of civilization.
The Greeks, right now on this National Geographic special. It's been nearly 2,500 years since workers put the finishing touches on the Western world's most iconic structure. "100,000 tons of the finest marble. More than 70,000 individual segments. Exquisite sculptures. All came together in majestic symmetry on this high rocky outcrop to proclaim the supremacy of Athens, a civilization at its peak.
To stand there, I got a little chill, you know. The hair stood up on the back of my neck. I would say almost a spiritual moment for me.
These beautiful statues and monuments declare to the world that they have achieved extraordinary levels of civilization.
Two and a half millennia later, workers are racing to rescue the Parthenon from the ravages of time. Centuries of wars, earthquakes, looting, plundering have taken their toll. Yet, it still stands, a proud reminder of human achievement. One that continues to inspire, even through the most trying of times. Not just in Greece, but wherever people strive for democracy. When navigating the present, the answers often lie in the past. The Greek writer Herodotus, the world's first historian, taught us that.
There is a great deal of continuity from ancient Greece to modern society. They are part of the same cultural continuum.
The people who raised these columns certainly had their share of challenges. Tyranny and famine, economic and environmental collapse, endless wars, an abysmal human rights record. Yet somehow, they invented everything from science and philosophy to drama and democracy. Greece, not Egypt, not Persia, not Rome, became the cornerstone of Western civilization. The question is, how?
If we don't ask them how they did it and why they did it, then we're not even attempting to understand the world as a whole.
It turns out the Greeks themselves were seeking to understand their extraordinary rise long before we were. Greek myths tell us they were born out of chaos, quite literally. Chaos being the Greek word for chasm or void. From the void at the dawn of the universe arose gods like Gaia, Earth, Uranus, Sky, Tartarus, the underworld, and Eros, love. Through a violent succession of infanticide and patricide, jealousy, deceit, and revenge, this first generation of divinities gave rise to the gods of Olympus. Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, Athena, and all the others. And ultimately, that God-forsaken mortal species, humans, to toil away on Earth. Yet the myths also tell of one figure who took pity on us humans, rescued us from oblivion, and paid the price for it. The Greek playwright Aeschylus wrote of this hero's travails at the height of Greece's golden age, more than 2,500 years ago. His name was Prometheus. The play, Prometheus Bound. Tonight, nearly 6,000 people file into a theater as old as drama itself, the Epidaurus, to experience it just as their ancestors would have. Tassos Nusias plays the leading role.
Prometheus is a titan. He is a god. Zeus had decided to eradicate mankind. Prometheus is the one who stands up for the people. Without him, mankind would be lost.
So he actually steals fire from Olympus. Humans haven't got it. They're still living in horrible caves. They've got no heat. They've got no light. They can't make anything new. They can't cook. And he gives them fire. And of course, that is the precise inflammatory moment when the human race takes off, when they start inventing everything.
With fire, the rebellious Prometheus endows mortals with all the elements of civilization. There was farming.
They had no sign of winter, or flowery spring, or fruitful summer, until I taught them to know the risings and settings of the stars.
Science.
Yes, and numbers, the basis of science. I invented for them.
Language.
And the combining of letters, mother of the Muses' arts, with which to hold all things in memory.
Literature, philosophy, democracy, drama. When this play first debuted, they were all just making their grand entrances onto the world stage.
Prometheus, of course, suffers terribly, and Zeus attaches him to a mountain, and he has an eagle to at his liver in posterity. But inside every ancient Greek head was the idea that if somebody was trying to deprive you of something that would help you, you could go get it. So that is this rebellious spirit of the ancient Greeks incarnate in an ancient Titan god.
What the author Aeschylus is telling us is that humans should use their wit and their wisdom and their will to try to make their own lives better.
Of course, this play came at the peak of Greece's golden age. By then, even the ancients knew that their many achievements weren't simply gifts from the gods. They were hard-earned over generations. The true story behind their dramatic rise lies beyond the myths and begins many thousands of years earlier, when, as Prometheus tells us,
they had no knowledge of houses built of bricks, nor how to work in wood, but lived underground like swarming ants in sunless caves.
Egyptians had their Nile. Its predictable floods became the lifeblood of the Fertile Crescent, as did the Tigris and Euphrates to the north. Here, fertile plains fed booming populations, allowing expansive Mesopotamian civilizations to flourish. Further east, Indian civilizations thrived in the valley carved by the Indus River, while the Yellow River gave rise to the first Chinese settlements and dynasties. In southern Greece, people weren't quite so fortunate. There was no mighty river, no nutrient-rich soil. Here, as an ancient saying goes, the gods threw down a pile of rocks.
Parts of Greece are extremely rocky. You know, you basically have mountains and sea. There's very little arable land. There aren't many flat spaces. It's kind of hard as a farmer to eke a living out of that environment.
Just outside of Alapotropa Cave, new finds tell a dark tale about how difficult life here in the Neolithic was.
How are we doing?
Parkinson and his team have uncovered the skeleton of an infant and a young couple in a tender embrace.
We've got at least 2, probably 3 individuals, right? Because we've got fragments of a 5th leg.
With resources scarce, it seems competition was fierce.
Together so we can understand all of it.
Nearly 1/3 of the people discovered here suffered blunt force trauma, likely the result of tribal wars over resources or territory. Average lifespan was just 29 years.
They had lots of physical stress. Their diet wasn't optimal. We have low content of iron and animal protein. We have high infant mortality.
Taken together, the skeletons reveal a bleak picture for these early Greeks. By the time the cave collapsed around 5,000 years ago, the nearby settlements were collapsing along with it. The Greeks may have become nothing more than a historical footnote, were it not for one obvious, albeit forbidding, advantage.
There's an interesting thing about Greece is that wherever you are, you're never more than 50 miles away from the sea. So the sea, you can almost see and hear it. It's part of your experience.
With its inlets and islands, Greece has one of the highest proportions of coastline to land area on Earth. And with such limited resources, the sea became a lifeline.
having to survive in a very difficult environment made people stronger. It made people tough. It made people defiant. It made people turn to the sea.
The Greeks were actually forced by their own terrain into becoming brilliant navigators very, very early on.
Some of the earliest archaeological evidence of their voyages dates to more than 10,000 years ago, when a type of highly prized obsidian found only on the volcanic island of Milos turned up on mainland Greece. Milos is just one in a circular cluster of islands in the Aegean Sea, aptly named the Cyclades.
These islands, on a very practical level, made it possible for the first seafarers to navigate around the Aegean, to basically island hop the same way tourists do today. And that played a really pivotal role in the development of Greece.
One of the critical things that happens is the development of a new kind of boat. It's called a longboat. And this lets you move way more stuff. You can go way further.
In addition to obsidian, longboats allowed early mariners here to haul resources like silver, copper, lead, and marble around the Aegean. By 3200 BC, people had settled the islands, and a new culture was born. The Cycladic people, as they've come to be known, would put their mineral resources to exquisite use, carving intricate marble statues and figurines, some of them life-size.
Some people think they're deities. They might be gods. They might be representations of goddesses. We know that they have some sort of a ritual connotation, and that's because they're almost all from burials.
Whatever the intent, their minimalist abstract features would echo through the ages, inspiring the likes of Picasso and Modigliani. But beyond their art, the Cycladic people may have left an even more indelible legacy on the creation of Greece. Their islands became a crossroads of goods, ideas, and cultures, bridging the entire eastern Mediterranean.
They're living on these islands, they rely on the sea, they know the sea. And because of the seafaring skills that they developed, they're all of a sudden plugged into this huge network that's linking all of the eastern Mediterranean together. And that's about to become hugely important.
Especially around 5,000 years ago, when the Stone Age gave way to the Bronze and the world's first global economy. Today, it's oil that makes the world go round. But back then, the economy was driven by an amalgamation of 90% copper to 10% tin, heated to a blistering 1,100 degrees Celsius.
When you mix that copper with another alloy, another kind of metal, it becomes hard. Now you can start to use it for weapons, you can start to use it for functional tools.
Versatile as bronze was, few had the copper or tin to produce it.
The copper is mostly from Cyprus. That's where we've got the name, in fact, Kypros. The majority of tin in the Bronze Age is coming from what we would call Afghanistan today. That's a trip of thousands of miles.
Demand for bronze spawned trading networks from Egypt and the Middle East, all the way to Italy, with goods like gold, ivory, and pottery being exchanged for copper and tin. Much like today, the Mediterranean became a shipping superhighway.
There's a kind of vogue for the idea of globalization, but I tell you, that is nothing new. This was a very globalized world.
With their central location and command of the sea, early Greeks would have been well positioned to partake in this Bronze Age trade. But archaeological evidence of their involvement can be hard to come by. Much of it lies at the bottom of the sea.
So much of our history is underwater. If we have changes in sea level, because there was an earthquake, because of trade, there's loads and loads of shipwrecks. And if we just stop at the coastline every time, we're missing out on a lot of the information that we need to get.
You have to look to the sea and you have to look under the sea to understand the ancient Greeks. And we try to do that with the excavation of ancient shipwrecks.
One treasure trove of clues has been the Uluburun, one of the oldest, most complete shipwrecks ever discovered. She went down in the eastern Aegean in the heyday of the Bronze Age around 3,500 years ago. Underwater archaeologists at the Institute of Nautical Archaeology in Bodrum, Turkey, have been diving on the site since the 1980s. So far, they've recovered nearly 20,000 artifacts, including over 100 amphorae, the shipping containers of the ancient world. And enough copper and tin to yield 11 tons of bronze.
We are lucky that they sunk, and we find them.
Tuba Ekmekci directs the research center.
It's like a time capsule. A ship loaded on one date and start sailing and sank. So everything belongs one date. The copper was coming from Cyprus. The tin was coming from Afghanistan area.
There was amber from the Baltic, ebony and ivory from Africa, and glass ingots from Egypt.
It was like a United Nations. Everywhere, think about this, all these objects coming from completely different places and got together in one boat.
In all, the ship was carrying some 20 tons of luxury goods and raw materials from nearly a dozen different ancient cultures. The most revealing snapshot we have of Bronze Age trade. And many believe she was headed for the Aegean Islands.
One of the questions that we ask is, of course, what would the rest of the world possibly want from Greece at this time?
Trade fueled the most powerful Bronze Age civilizations, and the early Greeks would have needed to bring something to the table. The first clues about what they offered came from one of the largest islands in the Mediterranean, Crete, where by around 2000 BC, a new dominant culture had overtaken the people of the Cyclades. Though they left behind some of the most extraordinary palaces in antiquity, who they were, where they came from, and what language they spoke are still a mystery. Even the name modern-day archaeologists ascribe to them comes from Greek mythology. The Minoans, from Minos, the infamous king of Crete. During his reign, King Minos exacted a gruesome tax on prisoners and innocents alike, casting them into a treacherous labyrinth in the depths of his palace. There, they'd face a frightening beast, the half-man, half-bull, Minotaur. which would devour them whole. Archaeological evidence, however, is painting a very different picture of the people who lived here.
Οι Μινωίτες, ξέρετε πολύ καλά, ανέπτυξαν τον πρώτο.
The Minoans developed the first great European civilization. They came into contact early on with the great palaces of Egypt and Mesopotamia, and they in turn founded great palaces.
The Egyptians had a big head start on the Minoans, having built their great pyramids and sphinx some 500 years earlier. But by 2000 BC, as goods and people were moving around the Mediterranean, inspired Minoans began raising majestic structures of their own. Palaces like this one at Knossos, the ancient capital, were astonishingly advanced. Complete with paved streets, the first in Europe, flush toilets, and a sewer system.
This is a very early civilization. And yet if you walk through the palaces that the Minoans created, you're passing through the most exquisite artifacts and architecture that you would still be pushed to try to find around you in the modern world. They created buildings that had anti-earthquake engineering, beautiful, fine teacups that are as fine as the kind of greatest Chinese porcelain. Amazing gold jewellery and earrings and necklaces. So this is an incredibly sophisticated culture.
And with the Minoans' command of the sea, this culture didn't stay on Crete. The Minoans took over many of the nearby Cycladic islands, including Santorini. Today, of course, the island is a major tourist destination. Back then, it was a strategic trading post that gave the Minoans access to powerful neighbors. But to play in the big leagues with the likes of the Hittite Empire in Mesopotamia or the Egyptians, the Minoans would have to offer more than fancy pots and jewelry.
If you look to Egypt and the Eastern Mediterranean, what do you find that's from Greece? Well, you find a lot of their pottery.
And inside the pottery?
Probably some of it is perfume. Wine is certainly not out of the question.
And one other commodity that to this day speaks to Greek ingenuity and resourcefulness. About an hour's drive from Knossos, Stelios Kalliorsis' family has been cultivating olive trees for generations. Olive oil practically flows through people's veins on Crete. It's used in soaps, medicines, for storing foods, even christening babies. And it was every bit as desirable back in the Bronze Age. According to ancient texts, there were three basic elements in life:
food, clothes, and perfumed olive oil. Yeah, it is real. They write like that. It was the medicine to make their life better and to live longer.
But starting and tending olive groves isn't nearly as easy as Stelios makes it look.
It's an incredible amount of physical labour, and it takes many years to settle in before you get a really good crop. So what this required of the ancient Greeks was considerable planning. You might never see a decent crop. It would be your grandson who did before it started taking any profit.
Only an innovative, resourceful, and patient people were able to unlock the olive's potential and reap the rewards.
The olive is fundamental to the ancient Greek, and indeed the modern Greek, identity. it's also good for trading with.
Demand for Minoan olive oil was so high, once it began flowing, it bankrolled their civilization.
So the olive one way and another tells you a very great deal about the Greek personality and intellect.
And thanks to another great Minoan creation, we get a vivid depiction of what Minoan life was like.
Amazing frescoes describing their world and their ideas about both culture and about the gods around them.
The frescoes depicted a world of plenty, with strong, youthful heroes, bountiful wildlife, lush landscapes, and vivid illustrations of how the Minoans interacted with and tamed the sea.
When a civilization is under development, they do more things, not just to eat and to put clothes on them. Minoans developed a nice life, a way to live better than before.
Successful civilizations are the ones that manage to bestow upon its citizenry the luxury of time that enabled them to think about things other than their own survival.
Minoan frescoes became the envy of the Mediterranean world. Their remnants have been found as far away as Egypt, Israel, and Turkey.
We don't know that they're actually made by people from Crete or if they're locals that are trained in that style. You really can't tell, but definitely either the artists themselves are being sent around or maybe people from the Near East that went to Crete, learned how to paint in that style, and then come back.
However it happened, this kind of exchange represents a crucial moment for the world.
So when you travel to other places, you don't just bring back products, you bring back also ideas.
Interaction is absolutely critical for innovation. When cultures come into contact and they're exchanging information, that creates new information. It sort of builds on itself.
It's clear the Minoans were key players in this globalized idea trade. But their role in Greece's rise didn't last long. Beginning in around 1600 BC, right at the height of their civilization, life began to crumble. For years, the leading theory for the Minoans' collapse was that they were brought down by a massive volcanic eruption on Santorini. The eruption left behind the familiar crater bay we see here today. It was even offered up as proof for the myth of Atlantis. But more recent evidence reveals the volcano did not wipe out the Minoans completely. Excavations on Crete indicate they were still thriving for another 100 years after Santorini exploded. The more likely culprit is less cataclysmic, perhaps, but more insidious. Long before Santorini blew her top, a fresco discovered here at Akrotiri suggests the Minoans may have suffered a more violent fate. The fresco depicts an invasion. With the Minoans falling victim to some of the ancient world's fiercest warriors. Donning their trademark boar tusk helmets. These were the Mycenaeans, the next people to carry the torch of Greek civilization. Their kingdoms, centered here at Mycenae on mainland Greece, are the stuff of legend. Hundreds of years later, they would be forever immortalized in paintings and in epic poems, like the Iliad and the Odyssey. not to mention countless Hollywood revivals. It was all inspired by this Mycenaean age of heroes. There was Helen of Troy.
Beware the Greeks bearing gifts.
And Agamemnon.
I will kill. So shall we all, brother.
And who could forget?
The invulnerable Achilles.
This was one of the first drafts on Greekness, and they were extraordinary. They lived extraordinary, exciting, sumptuous lives, and I'm sure that the later Greeks heard stories about them and were constantly trying to live up to that which had gone before, to this age of heroes.
But long before the Mycenaeans became legend, they first had to oust the Minoans. It's not clear how they did it, whether through a series of brutal invasions or just a gradual takeover and assimilation. But one thing is clear throughout Greek history: the culture always seems to carry through.
Early on, you can see that the Mycenaeans are really in awe of what the Minoans have. And in some cases, I would say they even imitate them.
We have cases where Mycenaean rulers will decorate their houses, their palaces, if you want, with wall paintings and frescoes inspired from the Minoans. Or they will import Minoan luxury items as signs of their connection with a more sophisticated and powerful culture.
And the Mycenaeans didn't limit these cultural appropriations to the Minoans. Their beehive-shaped burial mounds at Mycenae, for example, resemble underground tombs from Egypt. Mycenae's famed Lion's Gate mimics the sculpted lions flanking the ancient Hittite capital at Hattusa.
The Mycenaeans were always good at combining things that they liked. They were able to be inspired and even take elements from other cultures, but combine them with their own.
But when it came to the Minoans, the Mycenaeans did more than just borrow. Mycenaean kings took over Minoan palaces, including Knossos. They dominated the Minoans at sea, commandeering their trade routes. Before long, the Minoans faded into history, while the Mycenaeans flourished, expanding their civilization around the Aegean. And the way they held this vast network of states together was with one final Minoan appropriation: writing. Minoans wrote in a script called Linear A. Texts have been found all over palaces like Knossos, but unfortunately, not enough to decipher what they say. And perhaps their smartest appropriation of all, the Mycenaeans took the Linear A symbols, adapted them into a new script known as Linear B, and began using it to jot down words in their own language. Deciphered in the mid-1950s, we now know Linear B is an early form of the Greek language. And since language is the key definer of a civilization, we can now designate the Mycenaeans as the first true Greeks. Thousands of years later, we're still finding and reading their early texts. On the southwest coast of Greece, the town of Pylos straddles both myth and history. In Homer's Odyssey, this is where Telemachus, son of the famed Odysseus, first puts to shore in search of his father. Odysseus had been MIA for the last 10 years since fighting the Trojan War. To help him find his dad, the goddess Athena sent Telemachus to seek the counsel of wise King Nestor, who served with Odysseus in Troy. And for the last 7 decades, high on a cliff outside of modern-day Pylos, archaeologists have been digging up Nestor's palace. Alongside vats of wine and thousands of ancient cups, Nestor seems to have thrown a good party, were 1,000 odd Linear B tablet fragments. But Shari Stalker, lead excavator here, explains they were a far cry from epic poetry.
The Linear B tablets are mostly lists of things, what people bring to the palace, what they owe to the palace, things that are donated to the gods.
Offerings to Zeus and Hermes. Goods like olives, barley, goats, and wine. Writing in these early days was the equivalent of census records and product inventories, scratched into clay by ancient accountants to administer society.
They were never meant to be preserved. They were recorded on clay, but it was raw clay. So at the end of each season, they could just put them in water and, you know, reform the clay and make new tablets.
In fact, the only tablets to survive are the ones that were discarded, accidentally baked and hardened in burning ancient trash heaps, or when a palace was burnt and destroyed.
So it's purely happenstance that we have this archive preserved.
Recently, one such piece of ancient trash found at a small town called Eklina, about 24 miles north of Pylos, became archaeologist Michael Kosmopoulos' treasure.
Big box, tiny tablet. Wow.
It may not look like much, but this is the oldest piece of Greek writing ever discovered. The earliest writing sample from mainland Europe, dating to the 15th century BC. Like all the other Linear B tablets, it's not the words that have everyone here excited. On one side, there's a man's name, Letukos, followed by the number 1. The other side contains what seems to be a heading for a list of goods. But that the tablet was found here at all, way out in the boonies, is a big surprise.
This is small and there's only one of it, but it is the only tablet that has ever been found at a town site instead of a palace site on the Greek mainland.
Until now, we thought that writing was only used in major cities, like Pylos and Mycenae, that no one else could read or write. But the Eklina tablet shows otherwise, and that has broader implications. With writing in more common use, the reach of Mycenaean kingdoms may have been much more extensive and advanced. Rulers weren't just recording the comings and goings of goods and workers at their palaces. Writing had given them control over a much wider, more sophisticated network, allowing them to keep track of communities much farther afield.
If you see written administration, you know that you've hit the big time. That's when we start to talk about states and complex bureaucracy.
For Kosmopoulos' team, this tiny piece of clay offers evidence of an important turning point for Western civilization: the birth of states.
We live in a world of states, but it wasn't always like this. The transition from a world without states to a world where states dominate every aspect of our life, it's one of the most fascinating chapters in human history.
Archaeology tends to focus on larger cities with temples, monuments, and palaces, overlooking smaller cities like Eklina.
It's like trying to understand how the United States was formed. In order to do that, you have to look at the history, not only the capital, Washington, D.C., and the records there, but also the history of the specific states.
Through Iklima, we get a sense for how states in early Greece came together, as bigger cities started taking over less powerful ones.
This was a city. This was a city that in many ways was similar to the cities that we have today. For example, there was an area with government buildings, which is where we're standing right now, and the town, the residential quarters, the houses sprawled all around this area.
There was running water, extensive roads, and massive stone walls, thought by later Greeks to have been built by the mythical Cyclops. Cosmopolis suspects the thriving city must have been enticing, and that it wasn't long before it was overtaken by a more powerful king based in Pylos.
With every territory that he annexed, his state expanded, became more complex. You have the central capital at the top, and then a number of district semi-independent capitals. This is the hypothesis that we are working on.
The Mycenaeans likely went on absorbing cities and territories across Greece in this way, as they expanded their empire. By around 1200 BC, they'd earned their legendary reputation. For those at the top, life was good.
If you were a member of the upper class, it would have been wonderful because you would live in a palatial residence, a mansion like this. You would have slaves.
But Bronze Age prosperity hardly trickled down.
So this was not in any way egalitarian. It's only a certain tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of the Greeks who are benefiting. It is almost so perfect for so few, it's bound to collapse.
And collapse it did. If there were headlines in 1200 BC, they would sound freakishly familiar to ours today.
We have drought, we have famine, we've got earthquakes, we have invaders, we have internal rebellions.
There were even mystery warriors from the sea, according to ancient texts. And some, or all of these, brought the Mycenaeans to their knees.
Civilization is obliterated. Little by little, the Mycenaean capitals are either abandoned or some of them are destroyed violently. By approximately 1000 BC, the Mycenaean civilization is a thing of the past.
And the devastation wasn't confined to Greece. Once the dominoes began to fall, the globalized Bronze Age world would never be the same.
We've got a systems collapse is what we've got here. Over a period of 200 years, you go from the height of civilization to almost absolutely nothing. The great empires are gone, right? No more Hittites, no more Assyrians, no more Babylonians. Even the Egyptians have been so weakened that they're just a shadow of what they had once been.
It was the worst collapse in human history. We weren't back to living in caves exactly, but civilization suffered a tragic blow. Those gifts Prometheus had endowed upon the Greeks, writing, science, art, were all but extinguished.
So we get what we refer to as the first Dark Ages. And out of that, they have to climb back up. They will. We're going to get classical Greece. We're going to get Athens and Sparta and democracy. But it's going to take a while.
The opulent Bronze Age was over. But the lights didn't go out on Greece completely. Were it not for these dark times, in fact, the Greeks might never have achieved the Golden Age to come.
We have the great destructions, but in the universe, one civilization ends and another rises from the ashes.
Like the mythical Greek phoenix, out of the ashes of palaces and kingdoms would rise a new civilization. And this time, the gods' gifts wouldn't be reserved for a select few elite. They'd be available to everyone.
It's very rarely that there is a total disaster. As a species, we're very good at finding the benefit of managing to kind of make things better, even if it can take us quite a few centuries to do that.
Born out of chaos, delivered from caves, tested by the sea, and forged in an age of heroes and bronze. These restless, resourceful, innovative people would finally be free to carry the torch of progress on their own.
Next time on The Greeks. The Dark Ages brought society to its knees.
You go from the height of civilization to almost absolutely nothing.
But out of strife rose the power of the individual and a new social order.
So against this background, at the beginnings of science, abstract reasoning, comes Athenian democracy.
The Good Strife. Next time on The Greeks. To learn more about this program, visit pbs.org. The Greeks is available on DVD. The companion book is also available. To order, visit shoppbs.org or call 1-800-PLAY-PBS.